video podcast where we have a chance to talk to leaders in planning and policy in Texas. Today we have the great pleasure of talking to Charles Blain, who is the director of the Urban Reform Institute in Houston. Charles Blain is originally from New Jersey and attended the Fairleigh Dickinson University, where he graduated with a degree in political science with a concentration on American political studies. As an undergraduate, he volunteered and worked on various statewide political campaigns, focusing on minority engagement. While in college, he also assisted with organizing the Conservative Political Action Conference, an annual gathering of conservative activists. Prior to his service as president of the Urban Reform Institute, Blain was the Houston director for Empower Texans, the largest grassroots conservative organization in Texas. Blain's primary interests area is in criminal justice reform, focusing on the areas of civil asset forfeiture, overcriminalization, and transparency. During the 2014 election, Blain worked as a field director for Texas Governor Greg Abbott's successful gubernatorial campaign. A lot of big words like gubernatorial. Can be hard to say in the morning. Sorry. Well, welcome, Charles. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I was really excited when Jay sent the invite, so I'm excited to talk to you guys. So thank you.
So, we have some more general questions that we'll begin with, and then get into some more policy-specific questions. First question, what do you wish that someone had told you when you first got started in public policy?
So when, I think the biggest thing that I've realized, and it happened a lot in the kind of criminal justice side of stuff, was there are a lot of egos in it. And I guess it makes sense just because it's, politics and policy go hand in hand and you're always going to have egos. But I didn't realize how much egos often got in the way of good work. And that's what frustrates me now. And I wish I would have known in advance. Not that there's anything I could have changed about it, but just I think it would have been good to know. I talked to a lot of people who work in politics or policy and then get out of it after a cycle or a legislative session, and they say they get burnt out. And I feel like the reason that they get burnt out is because of all the egos that they have to deal with, even within factions of the same movement. Someone, they think their research is better, and so they get frustrated when you use yours, or whatever the case may be. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me, is that the egos. My thing has always been that I do this because I want to help people, and whether we disagree on the avenue to do that, that's something we can work through. And I think, whether we're on different sides of the political spectrum or whatever the case is, there's always room to work through it as long as we have that similar underlying goal. But when it's, when it comes to people who are self-serving or just have self-interest or want to promote themselves or notoriety or whatever it is that they want to gain from the process, I think those are the people that it's harder to work with. And so I try to align myself with folks who are just interested in ultimately helping people through whatever policy proposal that they're choosing to advocate for. And for me, that's how I kind of stay out of that whole kind of ego contest, if you will, is just really trying to remember that it's at the bottom line is we're trying to help people. And I think a part of the reason that the egos take so much or take the front seat a lot of times is because a lot of times people in policy and in politics get so far removed from the people that they're actually trying to help, so like even in criminal justice reform, I talked to a lot of folks who don't really spend time with people in or out of prison. And, if you don't know the struggles that they're having on the day-to-day and you're just reading the data about it, then you might not be able to be as connected to the group that you're trying to help as you would hope to be. And so if I had to say one thing, I definitely think it's the egos.
Thanks. That sounds like something that it's not anything that you could necessarily change, telling people to stay humble is not like super helpful when you're in the space and you're dealing with the problems. But it is something important for people to remember who are going into the field to remember that they're going into it to try to help people, to stay connected to those people, and that connection will better inform their work going forward.
Yeah, I definitely think it keeps them grounded. And then it also, if I would have known that going in, I might have been able to align myself better with folks who were within that same interest, who were there to help people purely and wholly, and that's it. And so and that's the thing. I think, you kind of get involved, and again, there's just so many egos and so much excitement and so much, conversation and hope and all this stuff that you get kind of wrapped up in it. And I think just kind of remembering that really helps you define who you're going to build coalitions with and who you're going to work with and how to keep yourself grounded. And I think that's the only way I haven't been burnt out yet. I think that's the best way to go, at least in my opinion.
So were there any new skills you found that you needed to learn as you, I guess, moved into different roles, or from policy area to policy area?
I think so. Prior to working for the governor's campaign, I was doing private sector policy work for Quest Diagnostics and healthcare policy. And I think the biggest lesson came from switching from kind of private sector policy to public sector policy. Was the idea of coalition building, and it was something that I didn't have a ton of experience with. What we did at my previous employer, it was very insular, and there was a competitive nature about things, which still exists, but it was just very insular, and there wasn't this idea that we need to build coalitions to advance our cause. You have lobbyists and stuff that you employ to do that, and there is work that is done building coalitions, but what we were doing is we were just kind of coming around one, unified goal of an organization, and the underlying goal there was to make that organization more money, and everybody kind of centered on that. And as long as we were doing that, we didn't really need to build coalitions. And so I think for me, transitioning into kind of first into campaign politics and then into policy or public policy was the idea that you need to build coalitions and be good at building coalitions without kind of money as an incentive, or without any other kind of external incentives other than advancing the policy that you're going for. And so I think, going back to the first question, it forces you to kind of set that ego aside. It forces you to work with folks who you might otherwise disagree with on other policy, but you build these kind of robust coalitions. And I think that taught me a lot, because coming from campaign politics, there was a partisan nature. At first it was the private sector aspect of it, and so I had that kind of competitive nature ingrained in me. Then there was the campaign side of things, which gave me this kind of partisan nature. And then kind of moving into public policy, it forced me to kind of strip away both of those, because you can't be incredibly partisan when you're working on a criminal justice reform, because it's just not going to work, or any other issue. Particularly now that I focus a lot on kind of what's happening in cities, you got to strip away the partisan aspect of it, and the competitive nature of it doesn't work in this world either. You want competition because it breeds better ideas, but the competition needs to be kind of grounded in the right reasons, rather than kind of purely some monetary purpose or something like that. So I definitely think coalition building is the biggest thing. And I think now when I meet people who are struggling to broaden their base or to advance their policy goal or whatever their agenda, a lot of it goes down to not being able to build some sort of coalition around that, even with people who, again, might disagree with you on other things, but not being able to kind of set that aside and pull those folks into what you're working on now can really slow you down. And so I definitely think that was kind of my biggest learning curve, if you will, when I made that transition.
Yeah, coalition building, I think, is something that keeps coming up lately, but also, thinking about issues that we talk about in planning school. You need pretty diverse coalitions to get like public buy-in on some kind of infrastructure project or something. So I think that's something that is not necessarily developed very well in school. My professors are not saying to us, okay, today try to convince 6 people in this room to agree with you on something. So I wonder how formal education could do a better job of teaching that kind of skill.
And I think it's incredibly important, and I think they should be involved in that. I guess some professors and classes shy away from it because there is inherently some sort of political nature behind it. You're trying to convince people and change their mindset and things like that, but it's so important. And I sit at city council all the time, and a lot of people work for a very long time behind the scenes convincing council members of one thing or another, and then next thing you know, one group gets like 10 people on their block to show up and argue against something, and before you know it, the bottom fell out and it's over. And so it is incredibly important just to be able to effectively do that and effectively communicate a message and let people really grasp what it is you're pushing or what it is you're supporting and why they should get behind it, and communicating it to different groups, how they can understand it. And that's something that we've kind of worked on a lot at Urban Reform and Urban Reform Institute, is that we want to figure out how to communicate these messages to people who otherwise would not be listening to a message of kind of free market, urban policy or whatever. So we want to be able to relay that to them in a clear, concise way that can, build a coalition and can bring them on board. So I agree. I mean, I think formal education really needs to embrace that a little more outside of just, kind of political science, because I think it will be helpful in the long run in so many different areas.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly because I am a big fan of coalition building, and especially spending time in a country in Germany where their government relies on coalition building. Like, if you don't have a coalition, you have to either have a new vote. Like Angela Merkel almost ran into that a couple of years ago when she was trying to build a coalition just to run the country. So I think it's something that I have now back in the States kind of slowly tried to understand why it's such a barrier in so much space, like in so many of these policy spaces, to build a coalition with others who, just because their thoughts and their opinions might be different, doesn't mean you don't have some sort of common ground. So that just really resonated me with what you said, because it is, you have to take some aspects out of it to find those common ground issues and, narratives that everyone can agree on and move forward and make lasting policy for everyone.
Right. And there's always going to be that give and take. You're not going to get everything you want, and neither is the other person. And I think everybody at times is going to walk away from a situation feeling like they might have lost because they gave a little too much. But you need to be able to have that kind of flexibility in policy, because it's ever changing, because everybody needs different things, because everybody wants different things. I mean, it's just such a fluid environment. So yeah, I mean, that's probably a really interesting perspective coming from Germany, being able to kind of see it, because I don't think we do it very well here. I think it falls apart very fast. So
you're fighting a good fight then, trying to be successful with coalition building. Sorry, August, I kind of took the conversation from you.
I think you're muted, August.
Oh,
thank you. I was trying to figure out what you were doing to this document, because you scratched out the question I wanted to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So what do you wish that the general public understood better about policy and government?
At the most basic level, I wish people understood the importance of local government. I mean, that's where we spend a lot of our time as local government. And we, do a lot of stuff at the state level as well. And I've done a lot of stuff at the state level in the past, but it's just, people don't seem to grasp the importance of local government and the immediate impact it has in day-to-day life. And, you see something passed at city council that can be implemented. I mean, well, we just, here in Houston, just passed a rental relief package for, I think, $20 million, and it's going to start rolling out, I believe, like this coming Monday. And so when you see things at the federal government, they usually don't operate that fast. And at the state government usually doesn't operate that fast either. But these things are immediately felt by the people who need them the most. And whether it's policing reform, whether it's, municipal finance, whether it's transportation, whatever it is, the immediate impact is seen much sooner than it is on the state and federal level. And I wish people would understand that not only is it more directly impacting their life, but that they could have a larger role in shaping that conversation, just because it's a lot easier. These people are closer to you. They meet more regularly. They're more inclined to listen to you than a state legislator here in Texas who goes into session once every other year and is getting inundated by requests and information. And, you better have your policy agenda detailed and outlined, and people convinced of it well before session starts and all that other stuff that goes into it. So I really wish people would not so much back away from their activism when it comes to the state and the federal level, but also include the local level in that, because it is so important. And I think a lot of people do. I just wish more people would. I was at, there's a college out here, Texas Southern University, and I was out there the other day, and well, actually it wasn't the other day, it was all the days have meshed together now. So like it was a while back. And there was a store, it's a little co-op out there. And I was talking to this lady who not owns it, but works there and has ownership in it. And she said, she's asking what I do. And I was telling her a little bit about it and what we do with local government. And she's like, wow, that's really interesting. It doesn't seem as though local government's for us. And she was a Black lady. And I think a lot, within the Black community, that's felt a lot, especially in lower income Black communities, it's felt a lot that they can't have a voice in local government or any government really, because they don't have, the capacity to give large amounts to candidates, or they can't lobby a bunch of people, or they can't, build a very broad coalition very fast. But to hear her say it kind of really brought it home for me again and made me remember that there are a lot of people out there who feel that way, but it's certainly not the case. And, I started talking to her about how she can have a say and it doesn't take much. And, you go down there at City Hall and you can have your 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever, to say whatever you want. And that message will often resonate with a lot of people. And so if I had to say one thing, is I just wish that people would put more emphasis on local government and the importance of it, because I think the outcome of us not doing that is what we're seeing in a lot of our cities today, whether it's, runaway finances, a lot of debt, over policing a lot of communities, under investing in transportation, all these different things we're seeing because people don't necessarily pay attention to what's happening at that local level as much as they do other levels. So I would definitely encourage people to take a look at that.
Yeah, for me, it's been really cool. I've been a local government nerd for countless years. It's like the first thing I do when I move to a new city is like, who is my city council person? Right. Who are my representatives? But not everyone that I know does that. But my friends recently have been like, I just looked at the city budget for the first time. Did you know we're spending this much money on this? And I was like, yes, thank you. I feel like people who have not been thinking about the impacts that their local government has on their lives are suddenly like, oh, these people are making decisions with the budget, with ordinances, with land use planning that deeply impacts my day-to-day life. I think that is something really cool that's been happening lately, at least in my social sphere. And I think I hope I convinced my dad to start voting in smaller elections.
Good.
I think it worked.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. And I've noticed that in my social circles as well, because my background wasn't in politics. Most of the people who I know throughout the large majority of my life, other than, prior to me moving to Texas, are not involved in politics at all. But I've started to notice that, kind of after these months of civil unrest and people are kind of really frustrated with all the things going on, I'm seeing people post clips of their city budgets and how much is going to police and stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. Keep it up. And so I'm excited to see that. And I hope it does stay. And I don't blame people for not focusing on it. If you turn on the news, you're always going to be inundated by what's happening at the state and the federal level. So it's more difficult and cumbersome to get information about your local government, even though it's closer to you. So I don't blame people for not being involved in it or not being up to date about it. I just wish we could change that. And I'm hoping that this trend is the start of that.
Yeah, me too. And so part of, convincing people or building a coalition is word of mouth, face to face, but also a lot of it is writing and publishing things that can reach more people. And you've done a lot of writing for many different kinds of publications. So what suggestions would you give students to improve their writing and to make it more effective and to reach different kinds of audiences?
Yeah. The number one suggestion is just to write all the time. Just keep writing. Even if you're not publishing something, just write, because it helps you hone that craft and just get better at it and helps you articulate your message much better. And so I would just say keep writing, whether it's for a personal blog, whether you just want to kind of practice and put together some thoughts on a piece of paper. Well, I mean, it's 2020, not paper, but put together some thoughts on Microsoft Word or whatever the case is, just keep writing to practice it. That's first of all. But I think, the second thing is don't be afraid to promote what you're doing, what you're thinking, and the work that you're putting out. I think a lot of the opportunities that I've had to write have come from a random stray tweet that I woke up one morning and said, hey, I have an idea about this. And I just tweeted it out and it got a little bit of traction. And then, whether it was the Houston Chronicle or someone who happened to follow me or followed someone who retweeted it, saw it and was like, hey, would you be interested in maybe expounding on this idea a little bit? And one example was I tweeted my frustration with so in Houston, there's an organization called Houston First, and it's kind of like a quasi-government organization that acts as the city's convention and tourism bureau. And they approved, well, at this time, they were discussing approving a tax abatement for a W hotel to be built downtown. And so I was just incredibly frustrated. I'm like, why are we talking about a tax abatement for a W hotel when we're downtown? If you just look right across the highway, people are struggling beyond belief, but we're talking about building a luxury hotel with, not forcing them to pay taxes on it. And I think there were some other, gifts and stuff built into it. So I just tweeted this, frustrated tweet. And at the time, someone who followed me, Evan Mintz, who was at the time, think deputy editor of the Chronicle editorial pages. He's like, hey, he messaged me, like, would you be interested in writing about this? And I wrote about it. And so it really comes from just kind of these ideas that you have. And a lot of times, you just get really frustrated about something and you don't have much to say about it at the moment, but you want to kind of put it out in the universe and then see what it's about. You might get some traction on it. More often than not, you won't. I mean, I tweet way too much, and most of those tweets do not turn into articles. And so usually it's just me rambling into the void. But the opportunities do come out of that kind of stuff. So don't be afraid to put your ideas out there and your thoughts out there. But again, promote the work that you do. Don't hesitate to do that. And that was something I struggled with at the start, and I still struggle with it to some extent, is when I'm writing or doing anything really, whether it's video, writing, podcast, I'm always like hesitant to push it out there because I don't know, I have some sort of complex where I don't want to promote myself. I don't know what it is, but I'm always a little hesitant to do it. But do it, because it really does. In the way I've gotten myself over that to some extent, or how I'm working to get over that, is the reason that I'm promoting it isn't for self-promotion. It's to get the ideas that we're talking about or that I'm writing about out there into the universe. That is the purpose of it, is to kind of expand that and get more people talking about it. Even if they're going to disagree, at least there's a conversation now about that. And so write all the time. Just keep writing to get better. Throw your ideas out there, whether they're half-baked ideas or full-baked ideas. Just start kind of putting your ideas out there in the world, and then promote the work that you're doing. Don't hesitate to do that, because you did it, you put some time into it, people deserve to see it, and you're going to get negative feedback, and that's okay. Sometimes you ignore it, sometimes it's great, and it helps you get better or maybe change your own perspective, but don't hesitate to do that. Just get out there and do it, and eventually it stops becoming difficult at that point. But I think that's the best way of doing it, is just kind of getting out there and writing, because people do need to see people need to see more ideas. We need to continue to add ideas to the conversation, regardless of if they're disagreeable or not. I mean, there's a line between disagreeable and offensive nowadays, but there's a very thin line. Clearly, we can it happens very easily. But people need to see ideas, and there needs to be a robust conversation about these things. So don't hesitate to put that out there.
Yeah, more articles from people who are not Richard Florida. I would love to see people who are not Richard Florida writing.
Exactly. Add to the conversation.
Yeah. Anyone, jump in there. Feel free. Great. Thank you so much. So I wanted to let my coworkers jump in here too. I think Madeline has our next question for you.
Yeah, I think speaking of Twitter, I stumbled across your Twitter recently, and I read your statement from back in June about your decision not to run for the chair of the Harris County Republican Party. And it struck me in that you mentioned that you are more dedicated than ever to remaining active and reforming the local party. And I know a lot of people who often say, I just know a lot of people in my personal life who often say that in different contexts, reform is impossible and it would be better to scrap something and build from the ground up. And that ranges from personal relationships to whole governments and departments, as we're seeing a lot right now, because they have been too flawed for too long to ever truly change. So for you, what is the value of reforming something rather than completely starting over and rebuilding?
So, yeah.
Sorry for big philosophical questions early in the morning.
No, I love it. I absolutely love it. Particularly because this one was kind of a deeply personal one for me because to kind of give a very brief overview of what happened, our incoming, well, now he has taken office, Harris County Republican Party chair, posted a racist meme and outrage ensued. People wanted him to step down and to not take office. And a number of people had asked me if I would do it, if I would run and take office. And I thought about it and decided against it. And throughout the course of me thinking about it, I was just watching things and watching the conversation surrounding the post. And a number of people who I worked with in the past and currently work with and know and have, had drinks with and eaten with and hung out at their house, were all defending this post, saying that, some of us were looking too much into it, or we were being too sensitive, or this or that, the other. And it just it ate me up a little bit. I'm like, this is, I'm telling you guys that I'm taking offense to it and I'm laying out the reasons why, but yet it's being just dismissed as though I'm just being overly sensitive. And I'm not one who often brings up issues about race and how they bother me as much. And so for me to speak up about it and then be silenced was really frustrating. And so I could see how in most circumstances in that situation, it'd be like, well, let's just burn it down and walk away from it because this is a mess and I don't want to deal with it. And I think that thought probably did come across my mind, but why I felt that it was important to stay involved and and to be clear, I've said numerous times since then that I'm going to stay involved in the movement, and stay involved in helping, champion ideas. I'm not going to be actively involved in building up the party that is now headed by this guy, but I'm staying involved in reforming what I can. And the reason that I see that to be necessary is because despite all of that, I do still think that there are good people and candidates who are involved in that apparatus and they don't have any other avenue of being involved. And so they pushed back, but they don't, if they were to leave, they don't, especially if you're a candidate, you can speak out and push back. A number of candidates did, but they're still a Republican candidate and they're going to be on the ballot listed as a Republican candidate. So what are they supposed to do? There's nothing they can do. And same thing for some activists who really want to be involved and really want to change the narrative and really want to change the message, but they don't have another avenue to be active. And so my thought is that, there are still good people that are involved. There are still great ideas. There's still institutional knowledge that we can build off of. And I don't want to just throw all of that out because of the bad actions of a few. However, I do think there comes a time when things like that do need to happen. And I just don't know that we've reached the point, at least here locally, with that. And maybe not even on the state level, although we haven't reached the point. We haven't reached the point here of just completely doing away with it on the local level. But my interest in reforming it is to kind of take those good nuggets. I mean, I think there are really a lot of good nuggets there and build on that and just work through it and kind of keep having these uncomfortable conversations and trying to force others to have these uncomfortable conversations. Because quite frankly, I worked at Empower Texans. It's, arguably the most conservative grassroots organization in the state, but people do look at me differently because I'm a Black guy from New Jersey. And now I work in, focusing on cities. And so it's like a really weird dynamic. And I think I have a unique voice to add to the mix. And so for me, I kind of came to this conclusion early on during this whole weird chair debate was that, if I don't, well, actually, no, it wasn't during the chair debate. It was right around, the murder of George Floyd, where I said that if I didn't start to speak up on issues like that bothered me, from my perspective, knowing that there are a few people out there who would listen to me, who otherwise wouldn't listen to that narrative, then I'm doing a disservice to any platform that I've been provided, and I shouldn't have it if that's the case. And so I started speaking out about it more, and I'm going to continue to do that because I do think that there's the possibility for change there. And ultimately, like we said in the beginning of this conversation, my goal with policy is to just, make people's lives better and to help them. And I look at politics as just kind of a vehicle for that. Like, you know, I'm an Uber Eats driver and the food is the policy, and whether it's the car or my bike or a skateboard, that's just the vehicle for me to deliver that. And so I talk about politics a lot and I'm engaged in politics, but that's because it helps me. That's how I've found my path to advocate for the things that I believe in. And so for the time being, I haven't been pushed to the point where I feel that it's time to kind of scrap it and walk away. I do think there's a time for that. For many things, I think there becomes a time when you have to say that. But at this point in time, I feel that there's still an opportunity to reform the party. And there's still a lot of people out there who are kind of, you know, screaming it at the top of their lungs. They're just not being heard. And unfortunately, the microphone's given to a lot of folks who don't have, you know, the best interests or don't say, you know, the best things. And hopefully that can change. And for the time being, I'm dedicated to trying to do whatever I can in my power to change it.
I really appreciate that, because like the reason that comment stuck out to me so much is that's something that I've been dealing with a lot in my own life for the past several years with friends and family. And it's really, really hard to be the person in the room like that has to say things that you know are going to upset somebody. It doesn't make it easy to make friends.
Right.
And so I just really appreciate you like having a dedication to that, because it's a really important job that is very, very hard. So thank you.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate it. It's you know, it's tough from time to time, but because a lot of, you know, when I started speaking out about the George Floyd stuff and I went to the riots, when my name was being floated for chair, someone sent around an anonymous email with all my tweets about George Floyd and was like, well, look, he's a Democrat in disguise because he's supporting this. And I'm like, I'm a Democrat in disguise because I'm supporting police accountability. Something that as conservatives, we all have claimed that we want accountability in every level of government. But when I speak out on this one issue, I'm now a Democrat. And so that stuff really bothers me. But at the same time, I've gotten a lot of, and I wouldn't say a lot, every now and then I'll get a message from someone who didn't understand or didn't agree or didn't grasp it, and they may not feel comfortable speaking out about it, but they'll message me and say, hey, you know, like, I appreciate you saying this. Like, it really opened my eyes to it. I might not be fully there yet, but I'm going to do some more research. And that's as much as I can ask. That is as much as I can ask, because it's an uphill battle. And so if it opens someone's mind enough to at least begin to have an internal conversation or a conversation with their family and friends and be a little more open about alternative viewpoints, then I've done my job, and I'm grateful for that.
And it's definitely, I know, at least something I've noticed differently from a few years ago is at least a few specific people who I know had a different position on a lot of things a few years ago are beginning to like, oh, well, let's think about this a little bit more seriously.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's great to see. And I'm sad that a lot of the current events is what forced folks to have that mindset. But, you know, but for big things happening like that, we won't see change. And so I am grateful to see that even though those terrible things have happened that have forced us to kind of move into this space, people aren't just letting it happen in vain. Many people aren't letting it happen in vain, and they're challenging their own beliefs or challenging the beliefs of others and considering alternatives. I mean, I just, you know, something has to come out of all of this. And I'm glad to see that we're having this kind of robust conversation across the country, really. It's refreshing.
Yes. Well, thank you again. And I think some of our other interns have a question.
Yes, I'm next. So we're on the topic here of police brutality and police reform, and I know that a lot of your interests lie in criminal justice reform, but I just wanted to get your take kind of on what do you think that the Texas legislature can achieve next year on criminal justice reform, and what do you think we can do given the situation before all of the nationwide protests and civil unrest, and given after? Like, do you think that the chances of pushing something through have been, you know, bolstered by this grassroots organizing and the kind of the topic being front and center in the headlines for much of the last few months?
Yeah, you know, I am so pleasantly surprised by some of the reactions I've been seeing from some Texas legislators about this. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen some really bad replies that I just try to ignore and grit my teeth. But I've seen some really good stuff and some really promising stuff. And I'm hoping that this next session produces reforms that unlike what we've seen before. And so one of the issues, I've done a lot of work at the Texas legislature, worked behind the scenes, worked organizing folks. The only issue I've ever actually testified on was a House bill 2 sessions ago, and it was filed again last session, that would have prohibited arrests for fine-only offenses or Class C misdemeanors. And so essentially, this would prohibit arrests for folks who are driving and forget to signal a lane change or have a broken taillight or other minor offenses like that. It boggles my mind that in Texas you can be arrested for such a simple offense like that. It carries no jail time if you're convicted of it, but you can be arrested and detained for that. And so what a number of groups, there's a group, Just Liberty, based out of Austin, that did fantastic work around this issue. And they found that, which I think we all can assume, most of the people being arrested for these crimes are low-income individuals living in major urban areas. And the reason that they have a busted taillight is because they don't have the money to fix it, not because they just are scofflaws and are enjoying running around with busted taillights, And so but the arguments against banning these arrests were just mind-blowing. I saw one person there who testified that if they ban these arrests, they would not then be able to arrest people and then search for other crimes to then tie them to. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily how it should work to begin with. Like if you don't have evidence for that crime, you should not be arresting them until you find evidence for. And so here's some of the arguments against banning it were just mind-blowing. But what I have seen is a robust interest, especially on the grassroots level, from the Republican side. I mean, I think the Democrats have been there for a while, and the Republicans, even at the most recent convention, tried to push it through as a priority, and it didn't make it into the final platform priority list, but it made it pretty far. And so that's saying a lot. And so I think there's a robust interest in doing away with that this time around and really helping people, because I think this for me, this issue bothers me a ton, because there were times when I was growing up where my parents didn't have money to fix a taillight or something, or a headlight, and to think that they could be arrested for that and then forced to, be detained in jail, and maybe didn't have money to bond themselves out, and then couldn't get to work. So then they didn't have money for a car payment or a rent payment, and it just spirals and spirals and spirals. And to think that this all started because of something as insignificant as that, it blows my mind. And so I'm really hoping to see some change there with that this session. Another thing I'm really hoping to see change with, and this is what gives me hope, is because State Representative Briscoe Cain, he's been rated, I think, session after session as the #1 conservative state legislator, came out and said that he wants to see some solid police reform, and he kind of listed a number of things that he wants to see. And this was maybe a day or two after the George Floyd incident. And so one of the things he's been looking at is, within Texas local government code, finding out how we can work in fitness requirements or enhanced fitness requirements for officers and use of force requirements and other things like that. And the idea behind that is there's a body of research that shows that officers who have higher fitness requirements and are more physically fit are less likely to use deadly force, because say you're chasing someone and they're getting away, you're more likely to pull out your gun or your taser rather than being able to keep up with them and then tackle them or whatever the case is. So he's looking at things like that and how you can work within Texas local government code to change that. And one thing I'm hoping is that the police unions have historically pushed back against a lot of the reform. And I'm hoping that with as much as much that has happened over the course of these past 2 years during the interim, that enough legislators and city council members and others who might typically, be in line with the police union or be in line with unions in general will see where they're standing in the way and will push back against that a bit. And conservatives have pushed back against unions for some time. And so I think to some extent, when they do say that the police union standing in the way, people just kind of turn a blind eye to it because they just always have issues with unions. And I'm one of those people. So I take responsibility for that as well. But I think if we start to see other state legislators and other politically affiliated folks coming out and saying that, yes, a lot of times it is the police union standing in the way of this reform that we have been demanding for some time. And now we need to change it. It might actually change some things. So those are really the two biggest areas for me is the banning arrest for Class C misdemeanors and the kind of change in the local government code for use of force policy and physical fitness requirements and things like that. And training, of course, I mean, definitely more training. But I think those things they're not going to fix the problem, but they'll move the ball down the road. And I think to some extent, we have to take what we can get when we can get it. And right now, the appetite's there for it. I don't know that the appetite's there for just a massive, overturn of the system or anything like that. But I think if we start to look at different pieces of the puzzle and figure out how we can fix it and kind of just center in, we can get a lot done. And also, a lot of this does come down to local governments too, with local city councils and even commissioners' courts working on things like enhanced citizen review boards for police and fixing their collective bargaining agreements with police unions to kind of make sure that police chiefs have the ability to hire and fire at will when things, prove to be wrong, and small things like that. I think they really need to take the steps here to start to work on that, because we still have a couple of months before the legislature's in session. But I really hope to see the legislature act this time, because it's far, far, far past time.
Yeah, I think that, it's horrible that these recent events kind of had to happen, like, for this to become such a spotlight issue. But I think that the fact that this has been so front and center, and it wasn't just another incident that people were upset about and then the news cycle moved on. It was something that stayed, and people made an effort for it to be something that didn't fade away. Like, people came out in droves to say, like, this is an issue that we care about, and this time we're not going to just mourn it and move on. It's something that we're going to say enough is enough. We need to look harder at this issue. And I think it's wonderful that everyone has some form of a place in this argument, right? Whether your argument is that we need to, take some of the funding and move it to other services that could help with the kinds of situations that we've seen, go deadly when they didn't need to, or whether your argument is that we have a good institution that just needs some help with the particulars and with the ins and outs of what, police chiefs are allowed to do, or what officers are allowed to do, or what officers are held to do and should do. And I think that, the broadness of this topic is really a good opportunity for this to be something that gains momentum, because every person can choose something in this issue that they want to work on and to push. And even if you're going to, downsize the size of these departments, the police officers that are left there still need to have better reform policies and things like you were saying with the physical fitness and use of force policies. So, I think that it's wonderful that that there's so much momentum on this. And I think that the fact that this is still going and that people are still talking about this, and we are this close to the beginning of the next legislative session, means that we might actually get something passed that might not have happened, previous years or even this year without all of this momentum.
Right. I think you make a great point that I hadn't thought of. But yeah, I mean, it's such a broad issue at this point that there is something there. Unless you were just adamantly against any sort of reform,
Right.
There's something there that you can get behind. Like, there's something you should be able to find there that you can say wholeheartedly, this is an issue, let's fix it. And whether you are fully behind defunding, whether you are fully behind, addressing union issues, whether you're fully behind, whatever it is under the spectrum, you should be able to find some wiggle room there. And so I think that's a really great point. There are way too many areas under that broad topic that no one can say that there's nothing that they can find in that area that they think needs to be fixed. So I think it's a really great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
I have one more question for you if you have time. We want your response to that. It's kind of a longer one, so I'll try and be as concise as possible. But we see, and we've seen this for a very, very long time, and we continue to see that there's like a lot of resistance to this idea of increasing housing density or building apartments in suburbs. But then there's also this problem of people need places to live. And so two-part question. How can we move forward to improve land use codes and development policy in Texas? And then additionally, what can other cities or towns within Texas learn from this walkable places and transit-oriented development ordinances that was passed this week in Houston?
Okay, yeah, it's a great question. I think so. Starting with the walkable places ordinance and transit-oriented development ordinance, I was supportive of it. I was a little critical of it on Twitter, and I think people took that to mean that I like opposed it. But I didn't oppose it. What I opposed was that there were like a couple things that I opposed, which was one, that the mayor in his discussion of it said that like people, I forgot what ages he said, like 25 to 35 don't drive. And I was like, okay, well, I drive, so you're completely just discounting me. And he just like flat out said it. It wasn't like, okay, like we're going to use this as a conversation point. Like he just like, they don't drive. And I'm like, well, like, all right. So I got mad at that. That was like one of my anger points. And then another was that where I live in the museum district, a number of folks were in opposition to it. And truthfully, the opposition that I heard wasn't really based on opposition to the actual policy. It was based on what they had heard at a community meeting and then kind of passed around. But the problem that I found with that is, from everything I've heard, I've lived here for 3 years, and I think maybe that's roughly about the amount of time that this conversation has been happening, at least for this ordinance that came together. I don't know how much involvement from the side of like the city and the folks who were pushing it had in coming and talking to these people and kind of convincing them otherwise. Because in the matter of like 2 weeks since it first came up at council, our council member, along with a couple others, came down here and talked to some of the people and had calmed some of their concerns, and then they were kind of ready to do it. And so, I mean, granted, there's still people who are adamantly opposed on it. I get next door, notifications every 2 minutes about it. But it calmed some of the concerns. And so I think it goes back to that point about kind of having robust public dialogue. And I think, I never got anything directly saying like, hey, this is what we're doing, come out to a community meeting about it. And maybe I missed it, but I never saw anything like that. And I think that was a part of the problem. It's like you got to get out there. It goes back to the coalition building thing as well. Getting out there and explaining to these people that it's not going to destroy their way of life and that it's going to make things better. And they live here near the museum district, and yet they complain about, because I complain about it too, during the school year, how there are school buses like all around here and there's a ton of traffic at 5 and you can't get out. And so let's have a conversation about how these changes are going to fix that and make life a little better here. And so I don't know that happened. And so that was one of my frustrations, was that I felt we could have done a better job of communicating between the two groups. And so our council member, along with some others, came out here and they talked to some folks and did a walkthrough of the neighborhood. And, and after that, some of the people, they were okay with it. Again, there were still some people who were adamantly opposed to it, but these are also people who are going to be adamantly opposed to anything. I keep getting next door updates about some guy who wants to build like those soundproof walls around the area of town because he says it's too loud. I don't even know how you could do that, but okay. So I think there are people who are always going to be kind of combative about change, and I think they're going to always be loud and squeaky wheels. But I think there's also an effort. There should be a better effort to communicate to the ones who might be able to be convinced. And I forgot the other half of your question. Was it how can we kind of advance it in the state of Texas?
Yeah, how can we move forward for improving land use codes and development policy in Texas? Yeah,
I think a lot of this is going to fall on. Some of it's going to fall. Well, it's actually I was going to blame it all on my side and say it's all Republicans, but it's not. I think it's bipartisan. I mean, because here's the thing. So there was the tweet the other day from the president about saving, your beautiful suburbs and how affordable housing was a burden. And it killed me. It really bothered me because I grew up in affordable housing in an affluent suburb of New York in North Jersey. And to think that, sure, I knew there were people around who didn't like having affordable housing in that town, but it provided my family a better opportunity to get me and my brother into better schools and to have, a safer neighborhood. And it provided that opportunity that they otherwise would not have had. Absolutely. And so to argue that they're burdens, it blows my mind. And then what blows my mind even more is that prior to that, last June 2019, he had an executive order creating a committee for reducing barriers to affordable housing. And a number of the policy proposals in there were addressing local zoning laws. And so I'm like, I don't understand how we make this transition. Well, of course we do, because there's an election coming up, but like, how do we make this transition a complete transition from saying we're going to reduce these barriers and try to get more housing in these neighborhoods to we need to save the suburbs at all costs? Like, I don't understand that. It blew my mind. And so I do think a lot of it is Republicans, because I even think that, well, I know that I've seen a lot of state level Republicans with similar rhetoric about that. And I think some of the fear there is that the changing demographics of suburbs, if this were to happen, means a changing political tide. And that could be the case, but guess what? That just means you got to work harder to advocate for, to work for the people who live in your district or to win them over. Like, you just got to do a little more work. I understand that they may not agree with you politically, but that should not mean barring them from living somewhere. Like, I don't understand how that makes any sense. And so I think there's that aspect of it, is trying to get, Republicans to drop the rhetoric about affordable housing and what it means. I mean, there was another example a couple of years ago, and I don't know if this guy was a Republican. He might not have been, but there was an affordable housing deal going up in the Galleria area of Houston. One of the guys, they go to this community meeting and they put him on camera, and he's like, if that comes, all of our cars are gonna be on hubcaps in the driveway. And I'm like, like, really? Like, that's what you guys think happens? Like, I don't, this is not like Cabrini Green in Chicago. Like, that's not what they're trying to do. And so I think the rhetoric needs to change, but I also do believe that, you have a lot of folks who are liberals who live in liberal enclaves, and they have the signs outside that say everyone's welcome here, but yet they're showing up at their community meetings and saying they don't want new development. And so I think we need to have this robust conversation on both sides about how new development doesn't mean a degradation of the neighborhood, and we need to be preserving opportunity for everybody. And I don't know how to convince people that if they were in that situation that they would want that too, because if they're not in that situation, they probably just don't understand. But we do really need to have that conversation. I think part of that is having one of the reasons that we operate in city halls is because they've often been very one-sided. I've sat in City Hall, Houston City Hall, for years, and it's often, a progressive group that's there advocating for what they want, and that's fine, that's their right. But my side never shows up. They just don't show up. And I think if we did, we'd have a more robust competition of ideas, and we'd be able to talk about things a little more freely, and everything wouldn't always be so combative, because when it comes down to the municipal level of things, it's not Republican or Democrat all the time. Most of the time it's not. It's just kind of better quality of life for folks. And so I think it's just a lot of it surrounds around the rhetoric of this stuff. I mean, a lot of it does. And I think people need to better understand what affordable housing means and what that could look like, and kind of get rid of these misconceptions about, whatever misconception they have about it, because there are a lot of misconceptions about it. So I do think a lot of it surrounds around rhetoric, and I hope to see that change. And that's one of the things we work on, is just trying to talk to folks and let them understand that it doesn't necessarily mean building a, 30-foot project that you would see in Marcy in Brooklyn, New York here. Like, that's not what it looks like today. That's not what we're doing. That's not what people are trying to do. They're not trying to degrade your neighborhood. They're not trying to overrun your neighborhood. Like, people are just looking for opportunity for a better life, and that's all it is. And so I wish I had a better answer, but that's about it.
I think that I just want to add, like, it goes all around. And like in Austin, there's really like two political parties in Austin. There's the progressive Democrats and the NIMBY Democrats. And like, and so I think in a neat way, this is like you were saying about criminal justice reform, that like, if you really believe in conservative government values, there's a lot of land use reform that you can support. And then if you really believe in progressive values, there's a lot in land use reform that you can support. And so maybe that's hopeful that,
it's kind of like with policing, they say that, we want limited government, we want accountability, except for police. We don't want to look at that, but we need to look at that. But it's the same thing on local government, like you just said. We want limited government, we want them to set our lives, but yet we want robust zoning laws too. Like, no, we need to take a look at those too and realize how that's if we believe in personal property rights, we need to be looking at that and having a very, very serious conversation about what that means on the local level. And it does not mean letting the city council dictate everything to what you can build, where you can build, how you can build. We had a thing a couple of years ago here where our historical commission, had this business owner bought a building that was within a historical zone. The building itself was not historical, but it was within the zone, and it had graffiti on 3 sides of it. So he painted the 3 sides of it, and when he wanted to paint the front facade the same color, which was like, it wasn't even like a crazy color, like it was a regular color. Somebody reported him, and then he had to go down to the historical commission and essentially beg for them to let him paint it. And so the guy who reported him is in the front row. He's just sitting there looking at him, and they're asking him all these questions they're asking the building owner these questions about it. Then they call up the guy who reported him, and they ask, well, what color would you like to paint him to paint his building? And he's like, well, I think he should paint it back to the original color. And under the ordinance, if you look at this section, you can tell him what color to paint the grout too. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, what? So this is so ridiculous. And the guy was like, I was just trying to get rid of the graffiti on my building. Like, that's really all I was doing. And he ended up giving up and just saying, yeah, I'll paint it whatever color you guys choose. But that's just one example of many. And that's not even the most egregious example. So yeah, there needs to be a lot of work there. And I think highlighting some examples like that and trying to reinforce the fact that conservatives are supposed to believe in private property rights. And if we do, this doesn't align with them very much. And so I hope to see some change soon.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much more to say on that subject, like just hours of complaining that I could do. But we won't do that to our listeners. They already probably know how we feel. And we want to thank you so much again for joining us in this conversation. It was really great and interesting for us to get a chance to talk to someone who has, you know, some different perspectives than we share personally. I think that's always a great a great experience to make sure that we keep in contact with people who have different viewpoints and who have, you know, maybe some different ideas about how we can make things better for all of us. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. Yeah,
thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. These are some great questions and incredibly insightful. This is a super fun interview, so I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
So
thanks so much, Tress.
Yeah.